Thanks for doing this. We got the technical difficulties all sorted out.
Seems to always happen with me.
There's no virtual meeting this would be complete without some sort of video or technical issue. That's how it goes these days. And this is a platform that nobody uses, of course, too. So it's not your typical Zoom or Google Meet where you've done it 100 times and you've had 100 of the same issues and you know exactly how to fix it.
Right. Yeah. In about 7 minutes, they'll probably ask me to update or something, and we'll just be back.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. Sometimes you just got to do the old unplug it, plug it back in trick, and that works. So that's what it was.
Who needs a help desk, right? That's it.
Well, thanks for doing this. You and I got together for coffee the other week, and I feel like every time we get together and we chat, whether it's coffee or lunch, I just end up doing a bunch of stuff the week after. I don't know what it is about our meetings, but it just reinvigorates me. It gives me the kick that I need, and I'm like ready to do stuff. And I was just down in Chicago the other week too, just because as a result of that meeting, I was like, why am I putting this off? After Mike and I's conversations, like we talk about all of these things that we're working on and all of these things that we know we need to be doing. And I was like, I'm just going to do it. It's 2 hours away. I'll just drive to Chicago and go to the event. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Showing up is half of it, right? And same here, right? You get stuck in your routine and things are easy, and it's just a matter of having a little accountability. But that little shove is done. So yeah, I feel the same way, man.
Yeah, definitely. You and I are a lot of the work that we're doing too has some good overlap. We're obviously more focused on how companies grow and assessing some of the things that play into growth, and nothing more important, you could argue, than the human capital side of things. So I'm excited to talk with you a little bit about this and get your perspective. So maybe where we can just kick things off, just tell a little bit about your background, your experience, and kind of what's led up to the work that you're doing now at Blue Lakes Consulting Group. That would be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll spare you the boring details of the first 15 years of my career, but it was 50-50 recruiting and HR leadership. So I seemed to toggle between those two functions, if you will. And it was around 2015, I made the conscious effort or the decision to just pick recruiting. Easy answer to that is I wanted to be on the front end of the life cycle, human capital. And HR is fantastic. And we can talk a little bit more about human capital later, but giving people careers, putting them in the right spot, and watching them perform is the rewarding piece. So 2015, I joined a global RPO provider in Milwaukee. RPO is just recruitment process outsourcing. So companies hire this firm for like large volume recruiting. I was on the SWAT team where we did more executive and technical search. And so I met a gentleman by the name of Jeff Dollar, who is now my co-founder at Blue Lake. So he and I worked together there. Then I worked for a regional company here, had my own business unit locally in Madison, brought Jeff Dollar with me to that company. And then March 2020, the pandemic at the onset, that's when he and I took the plunge. And
what a great time to jump into entrepreneurship, right?
Exactly. No, it's the best and worst time possible. Memorable for sure. But yeah, no, so he and I, this is the third time as the charm working together. We have a little bit of a different model for recruiting that we believe in. And so far, 4 years later, obviously there's been some ebbs and flows and ups and downs. We're still going strong and just happy to be here and landing in the right spot. And especially getting over the hump of the pandemic is super nice. So now when the economy takes a twist or a turn or clients do something that gives us a challenge, it's easy.
Yeah. Whenever you go through the hardest stuff, everything seems easier on the other side. I feel like, safe sentiment in regards to that. And I jumped into entrepreneurship post-pandemic, 2021, as you can really call that post-pandemic. And there was still all this talk about whether shutdowns were going to happen again and all of those things. And the hiring market was crazy then. It still feels a little bit crazy now, which I'm sure we'll get into. But definitely an interesting time, I'm sure, to be into that space. So maybe we start with this discussion around human capital and just the role that it plays just in the growth of companies. With just a basic definition, I think human capital can be a little bit of a squishy term, right? To some of us, even to me sometimes. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on just when you hear human capital, what do you think of? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, you're right. And this is my definition, of course. So again, everybody's going to have their own spin on it. But I think about it, and this is probably part of my HR background, but I think about it as 4 different pillars, really. So obviously the human piece, the talent that you have in your organization, that's what it's centered around. And then the second piece is like strategy and philosophy of where you're going and the goals that you're setting and what kind of company you want to become. Then there's a cultural piece, which is a little bit separate from that, which we can talk on too. And then the fourth piece is more tactical. It's the resources that your company has. It's the systems, it's the technologies, it's the toolkit that you're giving your talent, your salespeople, what they need to be able to grow. So if you think about that, it's a big piece, right? It's a huge umbrella. So you have the people, but then what are all the driving leadership styles that you need to be able to make it work? And then what do you give them to be able to do their job effectively? Essentially is what it is. So you can't really ignore all of those. You have to have those in alignment in order to really drive what I would call a true human capital strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And my experience too is you can't really talk about growth. You can't really talk about revenue generation without talking about human capital. Like all human capital, however you define that. And when I think about it, I just think of people. It's the people side of your business, which encompasses a lot of different things. I think the challenge is for a lot of us that sort of are in the back office sometimes, so to speak. It's not like a balance sheet item that you can quantify. Human capital doesn't show up anywhere on performance statements or anything like that. So it's hard to get your hands around it, I think a little bit, but we all know being entrepreneurs and business owners and working with businesses is people generate all of the outcomes, right? It's the people and the processes and the systems and all of that human capital that creates value ultimately in the near term and in the long term. So if you don't understand or have a human capital strategy, then you're probably doing yourself, I would say, a huge disservice if you're focusing on some sort of financial outcome or personal outcome or trying to meet some vision. Can't do that without having people and without having human capital, right, as a part of that picture. So I think that's great. I think that's a great definition to kick things off and set the stage for this conversation. Maybe the first area to talk about, just with the overlap and what you and I both do, is what is that link between human capital and revenue performance? And that would maybe be my first question for you related to that topic, is just, can you explain just a little bit more how you see human capital directly influencing revenue growth and just how companies think about performance as a whole?
Yeah. Yeah, no, so you said something about balance sheets, and that's what strikes me is the people in your organization that's the lion's share of your expense. Some people look at it as expense, other people look at it as an investment, but what you do with it is critical. And so the link for me, like when I work with all sorts of clients, huge spectrum, and some really have it together and others not so much. But the ones that I see that really grow, I'm talking revenue, I'm talking everything. Culture is fantastic. They're moving in the right direction. They're accomplishing their goals. They're growing past their forecasts, things like that. They make that link of human capital at the top of the organization, right? So does the top HR executive truly have a seat at the table? And do they really have decision-making authority to be able to make high impact decisions? And I'm not just talking about having a jurisdiction over the business unit, right? Everybody has their management responsibilities, the hiring and firing capabilities. I'm talking about, does the C-suite view them as a peer? And do they have the same level of respect and responsibilities as their peers? And so those companies really understand that function is critical to growing, especially their revenue, because HR in and of itself is the one that recruits the talent, right? So they're responsible for going out and finding the market's best and brightest. They're typically responsible for performance management and learning development, right? Once you get resources on board, how can you put the accelerators on top to be able to get them moving? Your champions in culture, I'd argue that culture shouldn't sit in HR, it should sit at the top. But by default, it falls to HR. I think that's a mistake. And all of the total rewards they're in charge of, right? They're responsible for incentivizing these employees to be able to exceed expectations. So you layer all that on top. That is the channel to be able to get more productivity out of your employees, and doing it in a fashion that you're not just squeezing them for more results, but you're giving them the opportunity to learn. You're giving them the right challenges in their career. You're incentivizing them based on what their individual motivators are, right? Which is all very different. So the people that get creative and dynamic around how do they recruit, how do they retain, how do they reward these people, are the ones that really see their organizations grow for the most part.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's a great explanation. I like what you're saying too, taking it back to that balance sheet analogy of, do you, at the highest level in the organization, view that as an asset to your organization, or is it a liability, right?
Right. Exactly.
Having that perspective. I've personally worked with or for organizations, I would say probably on both sides of that fence, right? So I am curious, just going along with this topic, in the scenario where maybe, or I guess both scenarios, let's talk about both, right? In the scenario where at the leadership team level, maybe HR doesn't have that seat at the table that you and I probably think that they need to grow successfully, or maybe the perspective is that it falls on the liability side of the balance sheet equation. How does somebody in an HR leadership position navigate that type of scenario? Because I think that's difficult and challenging in and of itself.
Absolutely. Starting with kind of the negatives, if you will, what HR brings to the table is alignment. And if you don't have somebody having that harmony at the executive level, then all the business unit leaders are basically running amok, right? And so what we get is, we'll get one of two things, right? And both of these are problems. So number one is, we will get somebody just telling me, out of alignment from the rest of the strategy, here's what I need, and go get it and just get more of it. So it's just sent out to go gather berries, and it doesn't really matter what you're bringing back. And that's not good for us, because we know we're feeding it into a machine that's not going to take care of them once they're there. The other side of it is, there's a reality to what we can actually find in the market, and people want like the absolute best for their business unit, but they make it incredibly difficult to achieve. A good example, like revenue positions I learned literally my first job at a manufacturer, early 2000s. The first lesson I learned was, I had 25 requisitions on my plate. Revenue generating positions come first, period. Everything else can wait. Now, it doesn't mean everything goes on the back burner, right? But the point is, the revenue generating positions need to have the attention and the focus. You need to move with some sort of velocity to get those filled. Not too quick where you make mistakes, but they have to move with velocity, and they have to be able to be filled with the right person. And that person is not just the skill set. So somebody might come to me and say, I need a sales and marketing executive, and they need to have a law degree, and they need to speak Mandarin. Your organization might need all those three things, but don't put them all in one position, because everybody wants to do more with less. So we need to break that up and say, no, what do you really need? What are the pieces that you want to acquire? And what can you train for once you get back here, right? Once we get them to home base. So that centralization of human capital strategy, and that person to be able to harmonize what is reality and what is fiction, and what can we actually go get from the market, and what can we afford to get? All those questions need to happen at the top. Otherwise, we're literally sent out on Mission Impossible almost every time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing that I see a lot too, I'm sure you do, is the disconnect between this idea of the right person and the right role, and how those two things, you have to get both of those right for it to work out correctly, especially in revenue generating positions. And that's what made me think about that when you were saying, or making that comment, is you see a lot of, this is the person that we need. And they start there. I need the tenacious person, or I need somebody who's hungry, who's not afraid to, pound the phone or be very proactive. And let's define the role first, so that you make sure structurally within your human capital strategy and your overall business strategy that you even need that role on your team. Because you want to start with the role. At least I think you start with the role, and then you say, hey, what's the right person to be able to fit in that role? And what are the characteristics and qualities, so that when you do go to market, you have a very crisp idea of what you're searching for. Because you can go out, hire the hunter and the tenacious person, the salesperson, but if you don't need a hunter on your team because they're going to be farming existing accounts or something like that, you're going to get bored really quickly if they really are that sort of hunter mentality person, and vice versa, which you see all the time, that you have this clear mismatch between sort of the psychographic and behavior profile of the individual and the actual role itself.
Right. That's, you should come work with my clients and tell them that, because it is so critical. And there's nothing wrong with saying, like, I need somebody that's just going to be here and will get through this log of calls and is going to learn along the way. But that person is probably very different than your out front public developer, right? The person that's going to be being creative and being super gregarious and going all over the place. It's okay to have like the differentiation between those people, but so you can't just have one organization filled with stars that are always exploding. You'll implode. Yeah, getting that role. What does the organization really need right now? And put your oxygen mask on first, and then we can take it step by step. I love that. Everybody should.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish. I know firsthand too, both having done it on the being on the recruiting side of the table, but also internally, right? You can bang your head. I've seen a lot, you get into a lot of, I don't want to say scream matches, but arguments over different aspects when it comes to hiring for key positions. And most of it is the root causes. Are we talking about the right person? Or are we talking about the role? Or are we talking about the right seat? Because those are, in my mind, two different conversations. And you got to really understand what you're looking for before you go ask somebody either internally on your team or you hire somebody externally like you guys to go out and start searching for it, because either, like you said, you're either setting up your partner internally or externally for failure by not having a crisp definition of that, or there's alternative outcomes, right? And everybody wants to have the best outcome possible, and you don't want to self-sabotage yourself either. So I think that's really critical. And it brings up the question too, this human capital strategy and how you think about that internally, but then just tying that back to the overall business strategy. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on how should companies think about aligning their human capital strategy just with their overall business objectives, and what are the components to think about, what's to consider, what are some things that maybe you want to avoid just from a pitfall standpoint?
Yeah, so a lot to unpack there. Obviously, some of the low-hanging fruit that I would pick on is that you have some external challenges that face you when you're trying to put together a good strategy, and you got some internal challenges that you face. Starting with the internal piece, and we can fast forward past all the pieces that HR is responsible for. When you're really trying to build out an organization, sales organization, revenue function, whatever it may be, the hidden biases in organizations they're hidden, right? But as an external person, you can see where they're going. So I think one of the biggest issues of putting together a clear strategy is to make sure that people are being open-minded about how they're building it, and they're keeping the company and the mission and the vision in mind versus their own personal ambitions and what they want to do with their business unit or what their own goals are as a leader in the organization. And that's critical because there's going to be a lot of pain in building that diverse workforce, and the people that you probably need on the team don't necessarily walk and talk and look like you, but that's what people err on the side of. They say that they want to build a diverse workforce, but what they really want is the person they can go have a beer with, which is just a homogenous environment that they're continuing to perpetuate. So that's where you have to break down, stop putting all the requirements on the role and start looking at the person. There are base requirements, right? If you're going to be a front-end software developer, you probably have to know how to code in Python or whatever the language is your company uses, right? There's base requirements there, but the rest of it you need to let go. And so the big things that people get in the way, I need 10 years of experience. Okay, like why? I understand the older that you get, the more experience you get, and there should be some wisdom there. That doesn't always play out. And some people gather that in 6 years and some people get it in 20. Right. So artificial limitations like that absolutely kill me, or has to have management responsibility, right? This person's going to have a team of 5. So they need to have proven abilities that they've already managed a team of 5 or more. If they manage a team of 2, really what is the difference? Because leadership skills come down to personality, not some sort of magical time on the block. And so anyway, all of these little things will chip and wear away at your ability to get the right people in the right spots and do it in a timely manner. Because again, having a revenue generating position open is nothing but opportunity cost for the organization. It's a massive amount of revenue lost as you fight over the type of person that you need. So Again, we can unpack that, but it does come down to your ability to be open-minded, your ability to take some risks, your ability to have some ownership in bringing somebody along and giving them the resources they need to succeed in your environment, blah, blah, blah. The external piece is even harder, right? So you need to be a place that you're known in the market as a good brand. So your employer brand really comes at the mouths of the employees that work there. So you need to walk the walk when it comes to that, having that public persona. You have to have the right resources to be able to compete and go out to the market and get the right people that are going to fit your strategy. The market is insane right now. Compensation is artificially inflated. Companies that have the bigger wallets are just paying exorbitantly over market to get the people that they want. So that's a massive challenge and a reality, right? So you either have to pick the places where you want to compete and really spend the money, or realize you are hiring to a budget and you're going to have to shoulder some of the responsibility to bring somebody along. And that's just the way it is. You can't have both sides of the coin, and nor can we change the market, because as a good example, we had an engineer that was making 115 and they wanted 120, 125 to make the flip. And our client said, all of our people are at 95 to 100. The best we can do is 99 to 102. And that's ridiculous. They're complaining like, that's ridiculous. This person is only 3 years out of college. There's no way they're worth that. That's not market, but it's reality. So the point is, somebody is paying that person 115. They are commanding that for their skill set. So the reality is that's where they're at. So you can't dictate that. So again, maybe you have to get the person that's 1 year out of college to be able to afford them, and then put them through a training program to get them to where you need to be. And that will solve your problem. But again, you can't have this if you're willing to compete here. And
Right.
again, it's not like one strategy is better than the other, because I'm not endorsing the fact that they should just overinflate their budget to go get all the expensive people. That's not smart either. Choose your battles.
Yeah, definitely. That scenario that you just brought up is, I'm sure, a very common one. It's still, today is common. It was common 4 years ago whenever I was doing recruiting too. I had somebody I remember complaining over $5,000 in difference in like salary expectation. And I was like, $5,000, we're wasting $5,000 by having this conversation, right? So it's also that too. In software engineering, just, and any role really, is opportunity cost associated with it. How much opportunity cost are you passing? Are you perpetuating by not hiring for this position? And how much are you spending on maybe getting the person that's 1 year or fresh out of, college or university, and the time that managers are spending on getting that person up to speed, the external resources you're bringing in from a learning and development standpoint, the delay in sprints and product development that's happening, right? All of these different factors, which you and we get, it's fun to talk about with us, but when you start to have that conversation, I don't think hiring managers necessarily think about all of those sort of other factors. They're thinking, no, I've got a number that I have in mind that I'm trying to hit. It's like buying a house. Here's my budget. Here's what it is. And here's what I'm going to get. But only until you go to market do you start to realize, here's what I can actually get for that budget. And slowly it starts to creep up when you're like, well, for a little bit more, I get an extra bedroom or something like that.
Right. Or stick to your price and you get a flooded basement, whatever the case is. But your point about the $5,000 is enormous, because they're so focused on trying to get what they want for the right price point versus looking at the downstream effects. So take that scenario. You're offering 62, the person wants 60. You're $5,000 off. It's not insignificant, but hiring a salesperson, it is, right? So what is the difference between going to that person and saying, I can't do 5, but maybe I can do $2,000. And guess what? Maybe I'll throw in an extra week of vacation. And that person is like hems and haws. And maybe they end up saying yes. And maybe they end up coming on board. But almost what I can guarantee is that person comes on with a bit of hesitancy. They know that their employer didn't pull out all the stops for them. And a lot of them immediately have buyer's remorse. So they may not leave right away, that they're going to be open for discussion because they feel they're worth more. And they probably are. So then flip that script and say that the hiring manager said, we really had a budget at 62. I understand you want 67. We think you're the best person for this organization. We'll give you 67. Let's get you on board. The person's going to come in with an entirely different attitude. They give me what I wanted. They see my value. I'm ready to go to work for you. And it doesn't always work out that way. But man, if I was betting on the odds, I'd say that's the way to go.
Yeah, definitely. what I have seen too, in my sort of perspective, is your hiring and recruiting process is very reflective of what it's going to be like internally once you actually start the job, right? And how you go about that as the employer as well. You should care about, if you care about human capital and talent development, because you're setting the precedent, you're setting the expectations of, hey, this is who we are, this is the type of people that we're trying to attract, and this is how we treat our recruiting practices and sourcing of human capital. And now it's not to say you do anything detrimental to from a business perspective, obviously, but you definitely have to be conscious of that, because how many times have you or I or anybody who's gone through a hiring process and thought to themselves, geez, that was a near miss, you know what I mean? Like, good, that was, good thing I didn't take that opportunity, or something like that. Or maybe you have a former colleague or friend who works there, and that doesn't surprise me. That's how the hiring process was. And then you're establishing that relationship, that employer-employee relationship from the outset, with the expectations of, this is how we approach, and this is our mindset from a human capital perspective.
Yeah. And again, it's all ringing true, right? Because there's two scenarios in mind. It's one company will expect the candidate to run through the gauntlet. They take forever to get through the process. The communication is poor, and they exhaust you trying to make you prove your worth to them, right? All one-sided. Versus best in class, where they realize the candidate holds the weighted scale, right? 50% on their side, 50% on the employer side. Both of them are treated with dignity. Both of them have decision-making power over the process, and both of them are evaluating each other to the same degree, right? Do I want to work there? So the people that get that right are the ones that win. And that really is reflected in the recruiting process. So
yeah, exactly. Especially if you're a player talented person, you know that going into this hiring process and these interviews, it's part of your power, if you will. So I can just walk away from this process if I want to, and they can go hire the person at the rate that they want, and I can go do that, right? But the market isn't always like that, though, from an employee side. And we talked about internal and external factors and how that influences human capital strategy, and tying that back to just the overall business strategy. But I want to focus on the external part, because that one, obviously, a lot more out of your control. What is the hiring market on April of 2024? What does it look like? How is it evolving? And just what are some of the challenges right now that you see?
Yeah. So it's brutal. It's still brutal. It's strange, right? So I think the economy is turning in a better direction, but not quickly enough. And we're not seeing enough sign that's giving people the freedom to move. So everybody's a little bit hesitant to be able to pick up the call. Maybe they take the call, but they're not ready to move very quickly. So some of that is okay, because you don't have people changing jobs frenetically. That's bad. So it does take a level of sophistication and patience to be able to attract the right person and get them to move. We already talked about compensation. Everybody says that's not my number one thing, but it's so close. It's so close to number one, you sometimes forget. So that's out there. When you're looking at salespeople, revenue generators in particular, you've got this whole legal web of non-competes that you're dealing with when you're trying to attract somebody, because everybody wants the person with the industry expertise, right? I want somebody that sells into these channels and knows CPG and all these pieces. The person you're looking for is probably, carved out for most of it. So you can't just go buy a book of business like you used to be able to without getting into a whole web. So those things are difficult. Luckily, the pandemic knocked down the walls of, you got to be here on site versus hybrid or remote. Although we do see the pendulum swinging back to more employers saying, no, I want the person here physically in the office because we have the commercial space, and in-person collaboration is good. And I agree with all that. And right, if you have a space and there's resources there, and in-person collaboration is absolutely critical to innovation, but you still have to be flexible with how you do it. And maybe relocating a family isn't as normal as it used to be, or just relocating an individual doesn't even have to carry a family. That's not what it used to be. So there's some complexities there. I think one of the things that I find is the biggest challenge, and is somewhat difficult to tell a client about, is they're no longer that special. Their benefits package is no longer that special. All the creative things that they're trying to do to say, if you work for us, it's special. I, there are pieces of the truth there, but they're not enough to differentiate and make somebody jump up and down and say, I can't wait to quit my job and go join you. Right. And you talk about, like, where's the last time you've worked at, oh, I hated all those people? No, there's always a good group of people that you get along with, that you can learn from, that you have fun with, and they become friends. That's just human nature. Every company has a team of great people. Unlimited PTO, whatever. You got a ping pong table and a kegerator. You can think of all these crazy things, but it's become all table stakes. And I think the high tech industry in the West Coast set the pace for that, and everybody's lagging behind and trying to follow. But again, like, that's another challenge for us, is trying to sell on something that isn't of interest to the person that you're trying to sell to.
Yeah, that's great. So that kind of begs the question, how do companies differentiate, right? If it's not on pay and benefits packages, and vacation, 401k, all of these sort of historical legacy things that people have been able to lean on, how do you work with a client? That's like the point of differentiation. What do you try to advise them on in those scenarios?
Yeah. I'll probably really try. I'm going to simplify this probably way too much. But so if you want to get your position filled in a reasonable amount of time and you just open it up, I feel to really get it done, you have to pick one of three people. The first person doesn't have a job and needs one. The second person has a job and hates it and would like a different one. And the third person has to have a sincere incentive to be able to develop their career in new areas that they don't currently have at their disposal. So obviously there are places where these first two people fit, and I'm not discounting them, and I'm not saying that's all negative or bad, but this third person is really what I want to focus on. And for 90% of the time, that perfect person that is willing to run through walls to be able to get the experience that they need to grow in their career doesn't fit all of the requirements that job description has, that the client has, right? They're not 10 out of 10. They're probably 6 out of 10. They're probably immediately disqualified up front in the screening process. And if not, they're judged based on the 4 pieces they don't have versus the 6 that they do. So yeah, the rest is table stakes. Do you have good benefits? Are you going to pay me appropriately? Do you have a decent culture? You're not toxic. All of these things need to be table stakes. So nobody's going to come to a company that doesn't have those. So unfortunately, you just have to invest in that, make it happen. It's really that critical piece of, what can I give this person as incentive in the opportunity that they don't currently have and that they want? And that there's always going to be a gap there. So the candidate that's accepting the position needs to accept the fact that they're taking some risk trying to do a job and achieve goals that they may not have a full toolkit for. And the employer is taking a risk on somebody that may or may not be able to bridge that gap in a fair amount of time. And it's not always a winning scenario, but I can tell you I'd rather take the risk on somebody like that has the right attitude and aptitude for it versus somebody that checks all the boxes and can walk in and say, been there, done that, I'll do it again. Right? You get more of the same.
Yeah, exactly. More of the same. Don't you want somebody who is looking to personally and intrinsically has motivation to challenge themselves and take on some sort of new challenge? Although if you just hire somebody who's been there, done that, then you're probably going to get been there, done that results, I would think. If you're looking to grow, bring in people that have a growth mindset and people that are looking for something beyond what they've historically done. And that probably plays into a whole host of things culturally, right? Like adaptability and just innovation and all of the positive inertia that companies want to build behind them whenever they are building out their workforce and thinking about workforce development. You got to hire people that have that forward-looking mindset. And that means you go to the market, that's what you're selling, right? You're selling the opportunity, the professional challenge to do something that is unique and different and requires a very distinct skill set that it's hard to capture and fit that person into a box and a series of checklists, right? On a sheet of paper.
Right. Yeah. And you eliminate that group think. And it's like sitting in front of a chessboard and you've always played chess. You're a chess master and the moves that you're going to make and you typically win. But in order to really innovate or do something different, it takes somebody that doesn't quite know the game of chess that well. And you trim the chessboard and look at it from a different angle. And all of a sudden new moves get shown that ordinarily wouldn't have been played because they're not how the game is played. Right.
Right.
And that's that spark, the creativity and the innovation. That's where that lives.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's great. I love that perspective of how to differentiate. I'm glad you picked that third option because that's where I was hoping you would go with it. Just because it is, and that's totally how companies think about when they go to market with a new position and how they hire. It's typically what they lead with, right? Like it's the first thing they tell people is we've got here's the XYZ pay if they even release that information. And then here's our benefits package and here's all the sort of, like you said, table stake things that everybody else, by the way, is going to market with. You look just like everybody else when that's what you lead with. So how do you start and position yourself just like you would if you were marketing a product or a service, right? That's exactly what you're doing. You're positioning your company, and that's what you're really selling to somebody is the vision of what that role is going to look like, how it's going to challenge them, how it's going to help elevate their career near term and long term as well.
Bingo. Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. One other question I wanted to bring up because I wrote it down and I thought it was interesting when you mentioned it. This idea of culture, right? Culture, human capital, growth, these are all, of course, intertwined with one another and play a really important role in just, near term and long term value creation. But you mentioned that culture, I think you said should not land on HR. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that. I want to hear your perspective on culture and what that means, like how that's developed and where it should live within an organization.
Yeah, no, it's a whole sticky situation, right? But if it falls on traditional HR, it usually is an agenda that's getting pushed out versus being adopted by everybody. And that's what is our value statement and what does diversity look like to us and what is inclusion at this company and then how do we define diversity? Is it race and ethnicity or do we also include other people, military veteran status or lifestyle choices and things like that. So there's a whole bunch that goes into it. And if HR is developing this from their best practices and pushing it out, it's not going to have the right type of ownership at the company. So the culture sits at the top with the C-suite and they need to make some definitive decisions of what they want to be. And so it doesn't have to follow any sort of rule out there. And you don't have to go with the current best practice of what to build, but whatever you do build as a culture, you're going to have to live with it, right? So you can't say that you want to be innovative and you want to break new ground and you want people to have the freedom and the flexibility to be able to change your company in some remarkable direction without actually thinking about, okay, what kind of environment does it take to actually do that? And what type of people do I need to put into the mix to be able to get the diverse thought that I need? And then how much freedom and flexibility do I need to give them to be able to go out there and accomplish what we need them to accomplish? All of those things are going to trickle down into your organization or vice versa, right? You might be in a very scientific environment where you have a very specific problem that you're going to solve and you need a whole team of experts in their niche or in their discipline to be able to get the job done. That looks much different than the other company that's trying to create new products and services and go to the market and take over the world. But again, so that starts at that very top and you need to make some decisions. What does my workforce need to look like? Where can we take some risks and where can't we take some risks? How much are we going to invest in it? And what truly are our values? And be real about it. Like really be real about it. If you really want somebody to have freedom in an organization and you're a micromanager at heart, it's just never going to get off the ground. Again, be free with how you think about it, but then have some constitution around living within your culture. Where I find almost all of it fails is accountability. So once you have your culture and how you want to operate, you need to live out those values day to day. And you need to constantly make sure that your organization is also living those values out day to day, whatever it may be. And so as you get on with your day and as you get busy, the lower you go in the organization, the less ties there are to it. So that accountability driven from the top all the way down is key. And that doesn't mean you're ruling with an iron fist and saying this is the direction, keep charging forward. It's just a matter of those are always top of mind and staying intact. Accountability all the way down. But then what people also aren't good at is adapting when it isn't working, right? Mm-hmm. So you might have a really good intention of driving a certain value through your organization because that's what you want your culture to be, but it's not getting the results that you need, nor is it getting the traction with the workforce. And you need to be able to reserve the right to say, I was wrong. That's not getting the right results. You reserve the right to be able to adapt to that and pick a new direction and transparently communicate that, and then hold accountability there too. That's a lot of like soft stuff and mushy stuff. And I didn't give you any clear, crisp examples, but that it just comes down to the human nature of picking a lane and staying true to it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. It matches well with my experience too in advising companies also is I've told businesses before, your culture is going to develop whether you like it or not. So may as well be deliberate about it, right? Have these conversations, right, at the executive level, set the culture, be deliberate with that. But even when you talk about culture, I think sometimes people think culture is such a squishy term, right? What is that? What do we even mean by culture? And I guess whenever I think about it, the companies where I walk in and I think, oh man, they just have a great culture, right? It's like good music. You know it when you see it, but it's hard to describe and explain. What I found is they have a very clear mission and vision and a direction where they're going. Everybody in the organization understands that and is able to communicate that, right? And is bought into it, right? That's the other key point is you can set a very great mission and vision. If people don't believe in it, then it obviously doesn't really matter. So that's one component I would say that I've noticed. The other one is the core values that they set for the organization. Now, everybody likes to think they set core values and they live their core values, but it's more than just writing it down on a piece of paper, right, or whatever, having it up on a poster to use the classic example. But right. Are you making hiring decisions based on that? Are you making promotional decisions based on that? And this is the big one, I think, is do you let people go, right, that don't meet your core values? Because most of the root causes of problems whenever working directly with sales teams, most of the issues are directly related to people that they know are not culturally living the core values of the organization. And for whatever reason, they just keep people around as a result of that. I can't think of a worse thing to do, not only culturally, but just financially. It's inevitable what's going to happen here. Everybody knows it, but for whatever reason, companies delay that for as long as possible. And I know it goes back to the old saying of hire slow, fire fast. And most people will nod and say, yeah, that's what we do. And it's no, I know that's not what most organizations do. They don't assess and evaluate their workforce on an ongoing basis against anything, let alone are they living the core values of the company and of the organization. And I think that has to be at the highest level, right? Executive team too, all the way up to the CEO has to fit that narrative.
And that's, if I could just stop on that for a second, because that's enormous. And it's not as hard to fire somebody that really sucks. It's harder to fire somebody that's really good and sucks. And when you think about bringing people into the organization, every time you hire somebody, they're going to change your culture a little bit because they're going to bring some baggage with them, good, bad, or indifferent, right? So you bring them in and it's okay. You don't have to, you don't want them to blend and bleed into your culture and become one. That's just how you get more of the same. So that you hire the sales executive, the person comes in, they're fantastic. They bring in one of the biggest clients that you've got. They're crushing their revenue goals, but everybody hates them because they're an asshole and they're toxic and you're losing people on the other side. But everybody looks at, how can I fire him? You have to be able to make a strong stand in your organization that you just won't tolerate that. Yeah. Even if it means that in short term, you're going to really take a revenue hit because the person is performing in their function really well. So
and if you don't take the hit today immediately by removing the person, you're going to eventually take the hit. I promise you. That's cancer that spreads pretty quickly. And it also sets a precedent at the organizational level that, yeah, this is something we tolerate and that we put up with. And so now you're establishing that culture, right? You're saying this is okay. And so you might not feel the immediate financial impact because this person's generating all this revenue for the company. But I bet you in 12 to 18 months, whenever this one person has culturally destroyed whatever business unit that is, you will feel the financial implications, or they'll eventually leave and you've just done all of this scorched earth damage as a result of it had you just taken the steps initially.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that'll go septic eventually.
Yeah, no, exactly. Let's wrap up here with maybe just one last kind of thought and question here about the future of human capital management, trends and kind of opportunities that you see. So you get to work with a lot of high growth companies that are hiring a lot, reimagining their workforce. What are some of the trends that you see shaping sort of the future of human capital management over the next decade?
Yeah, I think I can't really go a day without talking about AI. So that's all. It's been around for decades and it'll still be around. It's just becoming way more commercially viable right now. So if everybody can settle in and forget about the panic of what could potentially happen and just use it where it's meant to be, right? It's machine learning, automating tasks and things like that, are using AI tools to be able to take care of some of the transactional work, knock down some of the volume, speed up the pace of play of certain things. Those tools can be extremely efficient. And in the human capital game, it's going to be enormous because then we can get our jobs done a little bit faster. Now, the things that aren't going to get replaced, communication, critical thinking skills, true collaboration and creativity, all of those things are going to still come from the people, right? Not from AI. So it's going to get increasingly easy and more tempting to lean on AI to do a lot more for you. And I think the biggest warning that we have is to not let our skills as humans get fatigued or I can't think of the word, when you let atrophied is probably the better word, right? There's muscles there that we need to continue to work to stay healthy. So I think that'll reshape the landscape a little bit. And I don't ever see it like throwing it's on its head. I can't say never, but that piece is out there. I think what it really comes down to is humans are incredibly effective at adapting when big problems face us. We're not so good about being proactive to avoid the crisis, but when the crisis hits, we're really good at solving the problem then. So it's strange, but that's proven throughout human nature is what we do. So I think the emphasis going forward should be more about curiosity, creativity, thinking through innovation, collaborating across lines, embracing that diversity of a workforce more so we can look at things from different vantage points. And I think all of those pieces are going to be the softer side of human capital is going to be way more important going forward for all of us to be able to build a better future versus the hard skills that there used to be, like go get an engineering degree, learn how to program a computer, all of those pieces, those hard skills, like go to college and build this skill set and go out and you'll be worth more, right? There are areas that's still going to work in the medical field and some of the engineering and scientific fields. I get that. But even right down to the tech industry, AI is, you barely have to code yourself anymore, right? Because I think what's their AI tool, Copilot? And you can now have an AI pilot sitting right next to you, giving you tips on how to code better, raising its hand and showing you if you just made an error in your code, or just plain coding half of it for you. So again, all of these hard skills can be taken over. So we're seeing that flip. And I think we just got to be super cognizant of that looking at talent these days is going to be entirely different in the next 2 years of the company that you're trying to build and attract.
Yeah, no, I think I'm optimistic on the outlook from that perspective. I think we just take the AI sort of lens again. Yeah, no conversation is complete without a discussion about AI, but I'm optimistic in a lot of ways that it's going to help people do their jobs better. It's going to help companies attract better talent. It's going to help people be more efficient and ultimately help them do their jobs better, have a higher quality of professional and hopefully personal life too, as a result of it. I have I think a very optimistic outlook in that regard.
Yeah, I do too. And America has been and always, hopefully always will be one of the most entrepreneurial economies in the world, right?
Agreed.
And we just have to embrace that regardless of what we're going to face with the political climate, with the actual environmental climate. All of these issues are going to face us, but we have what we need right here in this economy to stay strong for a very long time.
Yeah, agreed. Except, all right. Thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate the conversation. Where's a good place to find Blue Lake Consulting Group? Where can they get in contact with you?
No, appreciate that. Yeah. So you can go to LinkedIn, Blue Lake Consulting Group, LLC. We're out there. Our website, www.bluelakecg.com. Of course, you can always give my phone a ring. I've got all my contact information out there on the web. We're trying to be as easy to find as possible.
Yeah, I imagine so. Same here. Yeah, all of this will be put in the as a final article and in the description and all that stuff too. So I'll make it as easy as possible whenever they're ready to call in the big guns. Whenever the job they need to hire, they know who to call.
Oh, appreciate that. Thank you. No, thank you for the opportunity. This was great.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. All right, we'll catch you later. Thank you.